Welcome to Dear Leaders Love Your People, the podcast that bridges the gap between what you need and what your team needs for you to be an even stronger leader. We're going to tackle topics like team culture, imposter syndrome, generational differences, but we're going to do all of that from the perspective that I think often gets overlooked. Your people's perspective, what they need from you. If you're wondering if this is like elementary school where we're passing notes between each other, yes, that is exactly what it's like, but we're not getting in trouble this time. That makes me your note passer and host, Brandy Sperling. I am a keynote speaker, writer, founder of Sage Culture Co., the learning and development company, and I am still the reigning goat of folding cootie catchers even to this day. In less than 20 minutes, we are going to make leadership development fun, actionable, and all about helping you connect and grow alongside your people. Wait, speaking of, I think you've got some mail. Let's dive into today's episode. Dear leaders, today we need to talk about feedback. Why do I feel like on the other side of feedback, it should say like, we should have this like dun, dun, dun. I don't even think we need a sound effect. I think that's perfect. You know, feedback, the criticism or the information that we give to our people, we give to each other that tells us whenever we have an opportunity to do better, whenever we have an opportunity to do something different, or we have an opportunity to improve something that we're working on. Feedback, right? If we're on LinkedIn, we've seen feedback. We love to talk about it in the professional world. Leaders love to talk about it, and for good reason, because feedback is the root of so much of how teams function effectively together, right? When we give and get feedback, we give each other information on how each of our unique perspectives helps us to know what to do better or differently on the other side. That's feedback. Feedback's great. And here's the thing, according to a Gallup survey, 65% of employees say that they want more feedback. That's over half of us. Over half of us want and need more feedback from you. But the problem is that so often whenever you approach feedback with us, that it's just this one-sided experience. We as leaders expect people to take feedback the minute that we deliver it. Or maybe you expect your people that you're hiring to come in and just automatically know that there's going to be feedback that's going to be given and gotten at any given time. But the problem with that is that doesn't really create a feedback culture, because for a feedback culture in a team, we need more than just assuming that people know how to give and get feedback and then assuming that they're going to take it well whenever we deliver it as their leaders. In fact, I love this analogy. I love to think of it from the perspective of a Warhead. We've all eaten Warheads, right? I was a 90s kid. We used to eat Warheads, the Warhead challenge, whenever we put it in our mouth, a really sour piece of candy to try and keep it in your mouth as long as possible. This is not sponsored by Warheads, although that would be a fun sponsorship, wouldn't it? So if we think about feedback like a Warhead, if I were to ask you what a Warhead was, you probably, if you've eaten a Warhead before, if you've eaten the candy, you would probably say it's a sour piece of candy. In fact, if you talked about it for any length of time, your mouth might start watering like mine is, because that's just what happens whenever we know that something's sour. But with a Warhead, the interesting thing is we always remember that sour piece of the candy. Our mouths start watering. Maybe we're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so sour. But if you've eaten a Warhead before, here's what you know. You know that if you leave the Warhead in your mouth for any amount of time, maybe 30 seconds, that the sour starts slowly fading away. And what you're left with is this sweet piece of candy on the other side. With feedback, so often what happens as leaders is you give us feedback and you just expect us to be able to see the sweet piece of candy on the other side. Like, this is sweet. It's information to help us to know what to do better. Absolutely. But the problem is that so often as humans, our brains are working against us and they're constantly looking for things that keep us safe. And whenever we get information and or an experience that doesn't tell us that we're safe in this moment, it sends up red flags. And that's the sour, is that if you tell the person reporting to you, hey, I need to give you some feedback, there is probably a chance that that person is going to go, oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen on the other side of this? Because their brains are trying to keep them safe. And too often as leaders, where we go wrong is that we forget that In order to create a feedback culture, we have to acknowledge that feedback is hard to receive, and we have to work with the brain in order to make sure that it's viewed as an opportunity from your people instead of a threat, instead of the sour piece of candy. Because their bodily reactions is probably similar. I mean, their mouths probably aren't going to start watering like with a Warhead, but they're probably going to get nervous. They're probably going to start sweating. They're going to start overthinking it. Their heart's going to start racing, especially if their brain is telling them, uh-oh, there could be danger on the other side of this. This isn't good. You have something to worry about. And so when it comes to feedback, what we need from you is to approach it from this holistic perspective of creating a culture of feedback instead of just creating this transactional experience where you give your people criticisms and just expect them to take it on the other side. And so what I'm going to do is I want to give you 3 ways that you can do this within your team. 3 ways that you can not only give and get feedback, but you can do it from a perspective of creating a feedback culture. One where your people can see the sweet in the Warhead much quicker than they start feeling the sour hit them from you just saying, can I give you some feedback? So here's what you can do. Number 1, you need to say it and you need to say it again. So often, whenever we get people into our teams or we jump into a leadership position, I think we just feel like feedback is unspoken. Of course, you're supposed to give and get feedback. I shouldn't have to say that we give and get feedback in this team. I argue, and we argue, the people reporting to you, that that is not true. Because we have to, as leaders, be able to reiterate the importance of feedback in our team and share the why with our team. Because so many people are coming from past cultures or past leaders where feedback isn't always used in the same way. This is the opportunity for you to start clarifying and painting the picture for your team of why feedback is important. That way they can see the sweet sooner. If you say, hey, we give and get feedback because I care about you and it helps us grow. That's why we do it on this team. If we say that and say it again and say it again, then now all of a sudden we're giving all of the people reporting to us a chance for their brains to catch up and go, oh, this is information. It's here to help me grow. This doesn't feel as scary anymore. And bit by bit, we start turning that sour Warhead into the sweet piece of candy that it's supposed to be. But in order to do that, you have to say it. And I would venture to say if you're a leader, you probably are in an organization that has missions, visions, values, and maybe feedback is in some of your values. Maybe it's very explicitly stated in your organization. The problem is we can't just say it once, you have to say it again. Even though your organization, your HR department, your execs, your leaders, whoever has said feedback is important, they can't be the only one saying it. You as a leader have to tell us, the people reporting to you, why it's important for our team. How are we going to approach feedback on our team? Define the why. Tell us what it isn't. Give us pictures of what feedback isn't. That way our brains have the information that it needs to discern whenever something feels like an opportunity or feels like the sour piece of candy that we're used to, but we have to keep it in our mouth anyway and wait for the sour to subside. So that's number 1. Say it and say it again. Number 2, teach us how. Teach us how to give it. Teach us how to get it. Too often within organizations, we just expect people to come into our organizations and know how to speak the same language, figuratively. Know how to give and get feedback with love and care, all with the same approach, with the same acceptance. We do it with love and care, and everybody just innately knows how, whenever that's not really the case. I know my experience with feedback is probably so different than even how my husband was raised within feedback or my team expects to give and get feedback. We can't just be using our own measuring sticks whenever it comes to something that's so important in building trust and collaboration in cultures. We all need the same measuring stick. So what you can do is give everybody that. Give everybody the same conversation points. Give everybody the same language. There are so many amazing resources out there that tell you how to give and get feedback in ways that really promote love and care. I love Radical Candor. Kim Scott's Radical Candor. That is a great resource. She's got some amazing videos on what Radical Candor is and how to actually deliver it. And that would be a great video to send to your entire team. Send it to all of us. That way we can all watch it and then have conversations around it. Feedback isn't just going to happen. The culture isn't going to just happen. We have to create the stepping stones in order to start seeing it within our people. And the quickest way to do that is to start getting them comfortable with the language. Give them the language. Give them the tools in order to do that. Give them the Warhead. Dissect it. Show them why part of it is sour. The sour coating is on the outside. The sweet candy is on the inside. I wonder how long this analogy will go. And if it's making you want to eat a Warhead, I promise you, I ate like 100 in 1 year, and they are just as sour every time you eat it, no matter how old you are. It's wild. So teach your team how to give and get feedback and give them the same language. That way, whenever you start doing it, start delivering feedback to them, we're already creating a little bit of a comfortability and recognizing what the feedback is, the language that you're using, and why we're doing it, because we already said it in the first step. So that's number 2. And the final step is show us how. Show us how. So often the Warhead analogy keeps us from even getting to the sweet in the end. Some of us can't even get out of the sour that the Warhead has to even enjoy the sweet piece of candy on the inside. We spit it out before we even get to the sweet. I have done that. I know I've sat in many trainings and many keynotes where I have people eat Warheads, and some of us don't even make it to the sweet. So what we need as people, the people reporting to you, is for you to show us how to get there. Model it. Give us some examples of how to receive feedback. And the best way that you can do that is by asking for feedback yourself. Start getting it from the people reporting to you. Seek it out in your one-on-ones. Ask really intentional questions. In fact, Radical Candor, Kim Scott, she calls them go-to questions. Use go-to questions. Things like, where did I get involved where you wished I hadn't? Where did I avoid getting involved where you wished I had? Or maybe what's one way that I could show up for as a better leader for you next week? I will include quite a few of my favorite go-to questions in your leader guide. You can find it in the show notes. It's downloadable. But just by asking some of these questions, you are slowly creaking the door open to your people walking through just freely to give and get feedback. But they have to feel safe in opening the door in the first place. And the way that you can do that is just by cracking it open, by asking for feedback yourself. But here's the thing. You have to remember that whenever you ask for feedback as our leader, you might even have some of the same tendencies that we do. And it feels like the feedback we give to you is the sour part of the Warhead. That's going to happen. It's just that there are things that you can do in order to prepare yourself for the sour so that your reaction is as neutral and as safe as possible. Because depending on how you react is really whether or not that door that we cracked open whenever you ask for feedback stays cracked, or it slams shut because you got defensive, or it didn't feel safe for you, or it felt threatening. Whatever it might be, that reaction matters so much whenever we're looking to you as our leader, asking us for feedback, and we give it to you honestly. So if you are in that situation, I just recommend ask intentionally. So find the best time that's not a super stressful time to ask for the feedback. Remind yourself before you even ask that, hey, this is about growth. I'm asking for feedback so I can become a better leader, not because I failed. And that way you're already sewing in some of that sweet piece of the Warhead before you step into the conversation. And the last thing you can do is just follow up on the feedback. Maybe you get feedback in the moment and you don't agree with it. That's totally fine. You're allowed to not agree with feedback. Everybody's allowed to not agree with feedback. Can we just say that? There's not a world in which someone delivers feedback that the person receiving it 100% always has to agree with it. That is unfair to expect anyone, because all of us have our own perspectives. It's you and me against the problem, not you against me. So then if you can have another perspective and I have another perspective, then the goal is how can we use these to solve this problem over here? Because it's you and me against this problem. So on the other side of asking for feedback, when you get the feedback, Even if you don't agree with the feedback, you can still thank the person for delivering the feedback. I recommend doing this in an email. Send us an email that says, hey, I know giving feedback is really hard, and I'm really grateful that you gave it to me because it's really given me some things to think about. It's really given me a perspective to consider that I hadn't had. All true things, even if you don't agree with the feedback. And you know what you're doing by doing that? You're reinforcing the idea that it's safe to give and get feedback. Now they've seen it modeled. And the next time that you go to give that person feedback, you have walked the walk and talked the talk and upped the chances that the minute that you step in front of them and say, hey, I have feedback, hey, here's this warhead, they're more likely to remember that that warhead is sweet, that there's a sweet piece on the other side because you showed them how. You can't just give us feedback and expect that we're just going to take it. We need you to tell us why it's important. We need you to show us how to do it. Not everyone has the same language or experiences with feedback, so give us it. Give us the language, and then show us how. If you start intentionally asking for feedback and showing us how to receive it, showing us where it fits within our culture, we're going to be more likely to follow suit and just pop that warhead right in our mouth, even if we know that it's going to be a little bit sour at first. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. Don't forget to grab the leader guide linked just below in the show notes. It's a downloadable resource to help you integrate today's topic into your team immediately. Subscribe, leave a review, and don't forget to sign up for our newsletter so that you never miss an episode or a leader guide. They're dropped directly into your inbox. Until next time, dear leaders, let's love our people, shall we?